Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. This morning we'll be doing another sutta study. This morning looking at a discourse from the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 4, sutta number 23, Loka Sutta. So we can start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll go through the discourse in Pali and give some explanation as we go along, and then I'll take any questions at the end. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Saṅghaṃ Namasami. So this is the Loka Sutta, Anguttara Nikaya 4.23. And this is a sutta which is particularly of interest for those who are interested in knowing the detailed meaning of Pali terms. Because one of the Pali words, which is actually quite significant in Buddhism, but which often gets translated in rather puzzling ways, is the word Tathāgata, which is important because it's one of the main titles of the Buddha. And in fact, throughout the suttas, when the Buddha is referring to himself, he almost never uses personal pronouns such as I and me. Sometimes he does, but usually not. He also doesn't usually refer to himself as the Buddha or as the Bhagavanta or words like that, though sometimes. But usually the word he most commonly uses when talking about himself is Tathāgata. So the Buddha, instead of the Buddha saying, I understand the world, he says the Tathāgata understands the world. And this is also important because he's also referring to the fact that this is the nature of all Buddhas. All Buddhas have the same basic characteristics. So he's saying that he has the characteristics of a Tathagata, which is the same as every other Tathagata, every other Buddha. So sometimes the word Tathagata is just taken quite simply just to mean a Buddha, which is technically true. But it's interesting to understand what this term actually means. So what makes this particular discourse of note is that in this discourse, the Buddha actually defines what the word Tathāgata means, and he gives 4 different explanations. And so the word Tathāgata, you'll often see it translated in obscure and almost meaningless ways, like the thus gone one. Anybody have any clue what thus gone one means? When you hear someone say, I am thus gone, does that mean anything to you? Does that make any sense at all? No? Not a bit? Okay, yeah, me neither. The thus gone one, what does that even mean? Or people get creative and they say things like the sublime one, which is actually quite nice. I actually like the sound of the sublime one. It just doesn't have anything to do with the meaning of the word. So again, what does this word actually mean? We'll go through the discourse and see what the Buddha says about the word Tathāgata, and then we'll have some discussion. So the Buddha begins, he says, Loko bhikkhave Tathāgatena abhisambuddho. So loko means the world, and Tathāgatena, so by a Tathāgata, and abhisambuddho. So the word abhisambuddho comes from the same root as the word Buddha. So Buddha means awake, awakened, one who has woken up. So abhisambuddha, here we have 2 prefixes, the prefix abhi, which means higher or superior, and the prefix sang, which has a range of different meanings. So one meaning is complete, and another meaning is by oneself. And so when we see the compound sambuddha, it's normally taken in those 2 meanings. So sambuddha, completely awakened, and also Sambuddha in the sense of awakened by oneself. So distinguishing that one of the critical characteristics of a Buddha is that they did not have a teacher who taught them the path to awakening, but they figured it out by themselves. So then the term abhisambuddha means to wake up to the reality of something. So often the term abhisambuddha is translated just with words like understood or realized or comprehended or words like that, which is fine in terms of grasping the meaning of the word, but it does miss out on this connection to the word Buddha. So loko Tathāgatena abhisambuddho. So this means the world has been comprehended by the Tathāgata. The world has been woken up to by the Tathāgata. So the Tathāgata has woken up to the nature of the world, clearly knows the nature of the world. So again, the Buddha is talking about himself in the third person using the term Tathāgata, but keeping in mind that he's also by extension saying that this is what the experience of all Buddhas is like. And then the next statement he says, Lokasma Tathāgato Visangyuto. So Lokasma, Pali people, do you recognize this? Lokasma, ablative. So from the world, Lokasma, from the world. The Tathāgata is Visangyuto. Visangyuta means unattached. So Sangyuta means stuck to or bound to or attached to. Visangyuto means not stuck, not bound, not attached. So Lokasma Tathāgato Visangyuto. The Tathāgata is detached from the world. He's not stuck in the world. So the Tathāgata has woken up to the world, but he's not stuck in it. He isn't attached in it. And further he says, Loka samudaya bhikkhave Tathāgatena abhisambuddho. So the term samudaya means arising or origination, the manifestation. So Loka samudaya Tathāgato abhisambuddho. So the Tathāgata has woken up to the arising of the world, comprehended how the world comes into being, the origin for the arising of the world. And then he says, Loka samudaya Tathāgatasa pahino. So for the Tathāgata, the origin of the world has been pahina, it has been abandoned, it has been let go of, cast aside. So the word pahina means, literally it means thrown away. So the Tathāgata has thrown away the origin of the world. And this is actually important because what is the origin of the world? It's craving, it's desire. And of course, what is the world? Elsewhere in the suttas, the Buddha answers this question, well, what is the world? And he says, the world is sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought. So the world means the experience of the six senses. And in particular, it's the experience of the six senses when tainted by desire and delusion, when affected by ignorance, misunderstanding. So the world then is directly connected to dukkha. When we talk about the arising of the world, we're talking about the arising of dukkha. And actually, those who've been paying attention to the Tathāgata Sutta that we chant here at the monastery, you might also recognize the term Loka samudaya from that sutta, where the Buddha says, one who clearly understands Loka samudaya, the arising of the world or the origin of the world, does not fall into the wrong view of non-existence, the wrong view that things don't exist, that nothing really exists. So the origin of the world, again, also in the Tathāgata Sutta, the Buddha says, dukkhameva upajjamanang upajjati. So the Buddha says, whatever arises is just dukkha arising. So the arising of the world is just dukkha arising. So it's nothing to get excited about. There's nothing special happening here. It's just more crap coming up. So there's nothing here to get obsessed with. And then the Buddha says, Loka nirodho bhikkhave Tathāgatena abhisambuddho. So the cessation of the world has been awoken to by the Tathāgata. He says, Loka nirodho Tathāgatassa sachikato. And he says, so the cessation of the world has been sachikata by the Tathāgata. So this word sachikata it's actually quite interesting. Again, it often gets translated in English simply as realized or apprehended. But the word sachikata, so it comes from sa, which means with, and aki, which means I, and kata, which means to done or achieved. So sachikata means you've seen it with your own eyes. So he's talking here about direct realization, direct experience, direct perception of something. So he's saying that Tathagata has directly seen the cessation of the world. It's something that he understands through personal experience. And of course, in the Kaccanagotta Sutta, the Buddha also says, dukkhaṃ nirujjamanāṃ nirujjati. So it's also when things are ceasing, it's just dukkha ceasing. So when we talk about the cessation of the world, we're talking about the cessation of suffering, the ending of dukkha. And finally, he says, Loka nirodhagamani patipada Tathāgatena abhisambuddha. So the path of practice, which leads to the cessation of the world, has been awakened to by the Tathāgata. And Loka nirodhagamani patipada Tathāgata sabhavita. And it has been fully developed by the Tathāgata. So this, of course, is the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Noble Eightfold Path is the path of practice, which leads to the cessation of our personal world, the cessation of this personal world of self-centered suffering, which we have been inhabiting for longer than we can possibly remember. And so now at this point in the sutta, the Buddha then goes through these four definitions of the word Tathāgata. So the first one, he says, Yang bhikkhave sadevakasa lokasa samarakasa sabrahmakasa sasamana brahmaniya pajaya sadeva manusaya. So the Buddha says, whatever there is in this world with its angels, so it's devas, it's angelic beings, with its maras. So maras are the hostile, deceiver spirits. So we usually think of Mara as being one particular rather grumpy character who comes around and tries to harass Buddhist monks when they're trying to meditate. But actually Mara is a category of beings, a category of high-powered devas who hate Buddhism and try to stop people from practicing. Brahmas, so the Brahmas are very high-ranking devas who live very peaceful lives and actually mostly don't interact with humans very much. They mostly just bliss out and don't really care too much what us lesser beings are doing down here. And Sasamana Brahmaniya, so the samanas, so the contemplatives, the meditators, and the Brahmins, so the Brahmins are the priests, the ritualists, the ceremonialists. So the Buddha is saying, and this is a stock description that we see in the suttas, which is basically saying everyone in the entire universe. So everyone in the whole universe, from all the different kinds of devas, all the different celestial beings and spirits, including all the different kinds of humans, including people engaging in any imaginable kind of religious or spiritual practice. So basically everyone. So he's saying, yang dittang, whatever is seen, sutang, heard, mutang, sensed, so that means like smelling or tasting, or touching. Vinyatang means cognized, so understood mentally. Pattang means attained or acquired. Paryesitang means searched for. Anuvicharitang means to explore. Manasa, with the mind. So the Buddha is saying, whatever there is in the world, with all these different kinds of beings. So whatever there is that is seen, heard, sensed, thought about, acquired, sought for, or mentally investigated. So all of that, he says, sabbang tang Tathagatena abhisambuddham. So he says, all of that has been awoken to by the Tathagata. All of that is fully comprehended by the Tathagata. So the Buddha is saying, like all of the possible experiences that any kind of imaginable being can have in the universe, the Buddha understands all of that. A Tathagata knows all of these things. So there's nothing in the entire universe that he doesn't understand. Tathagata understands every single thing, no matter what somebody might possibly see or hear or think, whatever somebody might search for or investigate. A Tathagata, a Buddha, understands all of it. And it says, Tasma Tathagato Tivachati. So therefore, he's called the Tathagata. Now, this first definition is not actually particularly useful because it doesn't actually really clearly define yet what the term Tathagata means. But it is giving a sense. Like when we talk about a Tathagata, we're talking about somebody who understands absolutely everything in the universe. And so at this time, I think it's useful to talk a little bit about the formation of the word Tathagata. So the word Tathagata is made of two parts. So the first word is Tatha. And the second word can be either gata or agata, which has a slight difference, which I'll get into in a moment. So the first word, Tatha, the word Tatha means as it is. Or it can also simply mean truth, as we'll see in some of the later definitions. So Tatha means things as they are, or reality as it is. So truth, or reality on its own terms, the way things are. And so then agata means to come to or to arrive at, whereas gata means gone to or reached. So Tathagata, then one of the ways of translating this is one who has arrived at the way things are, one who has reached an understanding of the way things are. This would be a very literal translation. Does that make a little more sense than thus gone one? Yeah. How about thus come one? Another common translation, the thus come one. Does that mean anything to anyone? No? Okay, yeah, we need to fire about 100 years of translators. So I'm not kidding. So one who has arrived at the truth of the way things are, one who has comprehended reality. So this is how the Buddha is saying, like, this is why we call a Tathagata, because they fully understand everything in the universe that anybody might perceive or think about or investigate. Then the next one, he says, Yancha bhikkhave rating Tathagato anutrang sama sambodhing abhisambhujati. So he says, from the night when the Tathagata awoke to unsurpassed complete awakening, so from the moment the Buddha attained full awakening, he says, Yancha rating anupadase saya nibbana dhatu ya parinibbayati. And to the night when the Buddha enters into the Nibbana Dhatu without anything left behind. So in other words, the moment of his passing away. And why the Buddha never actually says of himself as dying, but rather speaks about himself as entering into the Nibbana Dhatu. That's a very interesting question, which I could talk about for hours, but it's not actually the topic of this particular sutta, so that we'll have to wait for another time. So the point here is he's saying from the moment he attains awakening until the moment he passes away, he says, Yang etasming antere, so everything between those 2 points. He says, Bhasati, Lapati, Niddasati. So these are all 3 different ways of saying to speak. So he says, everything I say, everything I speak, everything I explain. He says, Sabang tang tateva hoti. He says, all of that is true. So tateva, so tata means, again, as it is, and eva means just. So tateva means just like that, just as it is, exactly true. Tateva, exactly true, just like that. He says, no anyata, not otherwise. So he's saying from the moment he attains awakening until the moment he passes away, every single thing he says is exactly true, just as it is. It's not otherwise. It's not false. It's not misleading. It's not incorrect. Everything he says is true. And he says, tasma Tathāgato tivucchati. So here the Buddha is taking tata in its meaning of truth, and gata in the sense of going. So the Tathāgata is one who goes by the truth. So here, Tathāgata then we could translate as the truth speaker. So the first definition, Tathāgata, meaning one who has arrived at the truth of the way things are, we could translate as truth finder. So the Buddha says he's fully understood everything in the world, therefore he's called the Tathāgata, the truth finder, the one who understands, who's found and understood the truth of reality. The second one, he's saying from the moment he attains awakening until the moment he passes away, everything he says is the truth. Therefore, he's called the Tathāgata, the one who goes by truth, the one who always speaks truth. So then here we could translate Tathāgata as truth speaker, which is a little bit more loose because, again, the word gata means, is from the word to go. It doesn't actually mean speak, it means go. But he's defining it here as meaning one who always speaks truth. So Tathāgata then means the truth speaker, one who always speaks truth. Then the third definition he gives, he says, yathavadi Tathāgato tathākari, yathākari tathāvadi. So yathavadi tathākari, so as one speaks, thus one does. Yathākari tathāvadi, as one does, thus one speaks. So he's saying he does what he says. So it's not the whole like do as I say, not as I do thing. But the Buddha's like, I say don't kill, and I don't kill. I say don't lie, and I don't lie. I say purify your mind of all defilements, and I've done that. So the Buddha is saying that his speech and his actions are always in perfect harmony. And so here, again, he's using the word tata, but he's using it in this more simple sense of meaning as. So yathavadi, so as I speak, tathākari is as I act. Yathākari, as I act, tathāvadi is as I speak. So kari meaning action and vadi meaning speech. So he says, iti yathavadi tathākari, yathākari tathāvadi. He says, thus, whatever I say is what I do, and whatever I do is what I say. Tasma Tathāgato tivucchati. Therefore, I am called the Tathāgata. So again, tata here meaning in a sense of accordingly. So Tathāgata would mean one who acts accordingly, or one who's, again, the meaning here is one whose actions and speech are in perfect harmony. So someone who is not a hypocrite. So a non-hypocrite, someone who is consistent. So we could then translate Tathāgata as the consistent one, though I think that would still fit in the category of bad translations. But that's the meaning that the Buddha is bringing forward here. Or we could say one who acts truthfully, but that's still not the best. But again, it's the underlying meaning of what he's saying here. And then the fourth definition he gives, he says, Sadeva ke bhikkhave loke samara ke se brahma ke sasamana brahmanya pajaya sadeva munasaya. So again, he's saying, referring to this world with all its different kinds of beings, so both the humans and lower beings, as well as the devas and brahmas and higher beings, so all the beings in the universe. So he's saying, of all the beings in the universe, he says, Tathāgato abhibhu unabhibhuto. So the term abhibhu, this is a bit of an interesting Pali word. So it's the root bu means to be. from this word we get the word Bhuta, which means a being. It's also from which we get the word bhava, which means becoming or existence or a state of being. It's also where we get the word bhavana, which means bringing into being or developing or cultivating. So the basic meaning is to be or a being. And the prefix abhi meaning superior. So abhibhu means the superior being. So the Tathagata, so the Buddha here is saying, a Tathagata is the highest being of all these different kinds of beings in the universe. The Tathagata is the highest being, the abhibhu. And there's also a little subtle jab at Brahmanism here, by the way, because abhibhu is the term that they used for Mahabrahma. So the Buddha's like, no, it's not the Brahma gods that are the highest beings. It's the Tathagatas. It's the Buddhas. Those are the highest beings in the universe. He says, anabhibhuto. So there is no being superior to a Buddha. And he says, anyadatu daso vasavati. So he's saying they have unsurpassable power. And so what this statement needs to be explained in a bit more detail. So this doesn't necessarily mean that a Buddha can do whatever they want, but rather that a Buddha there's certain limits to what can be done to a Buddha. So a Buddha can't properly be called omnipotent in the sense of being able to do absolutely anything, because they're still operating within the bounds of causality, within the bounds of cause and effect. But there are certain things, such as a Buddha can never be murdered. A Buddha can never be deliberately killed by another sentient being. We also talk about the 10 powers of the Tathagata, which actually would make a great Dhamma talk one of these days. So the 10 Tathagata Bala, the 10 powers of the Tathagata, which is talking about the powers of, for example, knowing the nature of the mind, knowing the nature of defilement, knowing the nature of the path which leads to the elimination of the defilements. So it's this exercising of power in the sense that, again, they have a full understanding of the nature of the mind and a full understanding of what leads to awakening, and no other being in the universe can overpower them. And so there's actually a number of amusing suttas which involve the Buddha interacting with Brahma beings, including one where the Buddha goes to see a Brahma, and the Brahma is like, well, I'm going to disappear from you now. And the Buddha's like, no, you're not. And the Brahma tries to disappear, and the Buddha's like, nope, I still see you. Nice try. And then the Buddha's like, now I'm going to disappear and you won't be able to find me. And the Buddha disappears and the Brahma can't find him. The Brahma's like, where did you go? What's going on? So in terms of the mastery of the mind, in terms of the development of supernormal powers like that, then yes, we can say that the Buddha does have a certain degree of power. But also in the suttas, the Buddha talks about certain things as being impossible. So there are certain things which are simply can't be done, even by a fully awakened being. You might say certain fundamental laws of reality which can't be broken. A bit like how in physics they say you can't break the speed of light, though they're actually not completely in agreement on that anymore. But for the longest time, they used to say you couldn't break the speed of light. So it's not like there's anything magical about the speed of light. It's just that there's certain physical laws which seem to be unchangeable, immutable. So in the same way, the Buddha recognized that there's certain basic laws of reality which are unchangeable, even by a Buddha. Buddha can't go around changing the laws of reality. What they do is they fully understand the laws of reality, and therefore they also understand the extent to which one can manipulate experience within the bounds of those laws of reality, which is what we call the supernormal powers. So things like telepathy and walking through walls and so on. So things which come up in countless suttas as being possible for one whose mind is extremely well developed, extremely advanced. So these were things that the Buddha could do. But there's certain things which cannot be done. Again, as fundamental laws of reality which can't be broken. But also, again, the point here is that the Buddha is making that nobody else can control a Buddha. Nobody else can exert power or control over a Buddha. And this is pointing to another meaning of the word abhibhu. So, of course, the word abhibhu, as I mentioned before, literally means the superior being. But it also has the sense of an overlord, a dominator, one who is in control, one who has power over others. So the Buddha here is saying nobody else has power over a Buddha. A Buddha is completely independent. They're their own master. And he says, Tasma Tathagatoti Vucchati. So again, taking tata in its sense of as it is. So one who goes or accordingly. So Tathagata, one who goes according to their own will. So the self-directed one, which again is not actually necessarily a decent translation of the word Tathagata, but it is one way of taking this word, and it's one definition he's giving here. So one who goes according to their own will, so a self-directed one. So putting all this together, then we here have the Buddha giving 4 definitions of the word Tathagata. The first one is Tathagata in the sense of one who has arrived, agata, at the truth of how things are, tata. So Tathagata, the truth finder, the truth, one who has reached the truth. The second one, Tathagata in the sense of one who always speaks in accordance with reality, one who always speaks truthfully. So again, tata in the sense of according to reality or as it is or truthful. So Tathagata, the truth speaker, one who always speaks the truth. The third one, one who always acts according to what they say and always speaks according to how they act. So Tathagata in the sense of one who goes according to one's speech and one who speaks according to one's actions. So the consistent one, though I'm not actually recommending we start translating Tathagata as the consistent one. And then finally, the unsurpassed being, the one who is not controlled by any other. And by the way, this is important because one of the developments after the passing of the Buddha was some of the Brahmanists then tried to say that the Buddha was basically a puppet of Brahma or an incarnation of Brahma. And in fact, that persists even to this day. You'll sometimes hear people say that the Buddha was just an incarnation of Vishnu. So one of the Hindu gods coming down and saying a bunch of weird stuff, which was somehow oddly in direct contradiction to standard Hindu doctrine, but that kind of gets brushed under the carpet. So anyway, so it's saying that a Buddha is not controlled by any other being, but rather they go according to their own knowledge, according to their own power. So Tathagata, tata in the sense of according, and gata in the sense of going. So going according to their own will. So the self-directed one. And then at this point, there's a poem, which is basically just repeating the central point of the sutta, but in a poetic way. But since I've gone through the body of the text, on this occasion, I won't go through the poem. Instead, we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and then we'll go through whatever questions there are. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And hello to the people joining in online. So hello to Kumu, Jayanta, Miguel, Yankee, Jeff, Kit, John, Bhumika, Sud, Jessica, Let It Go, Bhante Sankecha, hello Bhante, good to see you. Also someone with a Sinhala name that I can't read Sinhala letters, so I don't know how to pronounce your name. So welcome to all of you. And I see a couple questions online. So Jeff, I think in response to me asking if the term thus gone one means anything to anyone, Jeff said no meaning. For the thus gone one with an undefined thus just begs the question, how? Yeah, thus gone one. What does that even mean? I don't know. Then Let It Go, Let It Be says, Thich Nhat Hanh sometimes referred to himself in the third person, which sort of unnerved me, but I'm not sure why. Can you help me understand about speaking in third person? Well, first off, I don't recommend doing it because for most people, it just sounds pretentious and actually usually winds up obscuring the meaning of things. So generally speaking, actually the Buddha in many places in the suttas, he said not to override conventional speech. And this comes up in many places. One notable one is the Arana Vibhanga Sutta, the discourse on the analysis of non-conflict. And in that sutta, the Buddha says that one should not insist upon using specific terminology, but rather to try to understand how the people around you are using language and to try to speak according to how the people around you are speaking. So he gives the example of how, like, one person calls it a bowl, another person calls it a vessel, another person calls it a saucer, another person calls it a dish, another calls it a pot. And he's like, well, whatever people say, just try to understand what they mean. Like you listen and you're like, oh, when these people are saying all these different words, they're all just talking about a bowl. What I call a bowl, they're just calling it using different words. So rather than insisting that they all have to change their words to fit your words, instead you just speak according to the conventions. So similarly, the Buddha also was challenged about why his disciples would use personal pronouns. If there's no self, then why do people say things like I and me and myself? And the Buddha's answer was basically that this is the use of conventional language for the sake of clear communication. So similarly, if we all start speaking in the third person, then communication is going to get a little bit more challenging. And it gets even more challenging if we start to speak in terms of absolute. So the Buddha gives the example of if we all say like the five khandhas are sitting, the five khandhas are speaking to the five khandhas about the five khandhas. Well, it just becomes meaningless. Instead, we say, I am speaking to Katie about Linda, and then we all know exactly what's going on. But if we say the five khandhas are talking to the five khandhas about the five khandhas, nobody has any clue what's going on. So nonetheless, you will sometimes encounter Buddhist teachers who use the third person, and one reason for this is to depersonalize things. Because ultimately when we talk Dhamma, it's not about me. We're just trying to help people understand the Buddhist teachings. So it isn't about me and trying to get people to like me or respect me, but rather it's about getting people to understand and appreciate the Dhamma. So speaking in the third person can be a way of starting to distance oneself a little bit from the words being said. And also, again, depersonalizing a bit. Like, what is this being that we talk about? This being that we talk about is the product of particular causes and conditions. So it's not really me, but rather it's the product of the particular causes and conditions that this being has gone through. So speaking in the third person can sometimes be a way also of starting to depersonalize our experience and see it as being the result of natural causes and conditions. That said, again, generally speaking, I don't recommend speaking in the third person. yeah, also, as I mentioned before, it also tends to just sound really like pretentious, and ironically, it sounds kind of arrogant usually. Like, Bhante Suddhāso, so excellent. And it's like, well, okay, good for you. So, and Kumu says, is this understanding correct? When the Dhamma is no longer available in the world, the new Tathagata appears and rediscovers the truth and the Noble Eightfold Path to liberation, Nirvana. Yes. However, it's usually quite a long time between Buddhas. So don't wait. Take the opportunity that you have. But yes, after one iteration of Buddhism disappears, then eventually another Buddha will arise and start teaching again. And they teach basically the same stuff. They will use the particular language and phrasing and relevant to the time and place where they appear. But the basic Dhamma principles are always the same, regardless of where a Buddha appears. And Sud says, in terms of the sutta, who are the Anuttaro Purisa? Does that term come up in this discourse? So the term Anuttaro Purisa doesn't actually come up in the sutta, so I'm not quite sure what you're referring to in this discourse, because that term doesn't appear in this sutta. And Jeff says, is the gata of the Tathagata the same as the gata of gate gate paragate parasangate of the Prajnaparamita Sutra? It's actually the same word. So again, the word gata just means gone. That's its basic, simple meaning. So the term gate gate paragate parasangate, which everybody mispronounces, by the way. So it's gate gate paragate parasangate. Just means gone, gone, gone beyond, completely gone beyond. So it's talking about how an awakened being has completely transcended conventional reality. They've completely transcended the world. So it is the same word as the word in Tathāgata. There's no H in gata, by the way. It says Gata. And Grump has an off-topic question. First off, love your name. So Grump Grump has an off-topic question. Please bring that to Monk Chat this evening. So every evening at 7:30 p.m. we have our Monk Chat session where you can ask all the off-topic questions you want. And similarly, Sud is asking a question about Buddhanussati. Again, off-topic. Please bring that to Monk Chat this evening. And Tamji is the best of tamers. Again, that doesn't appear in the sutta. So Sud, it's a good question. It's just not to do with the sutta. So you could bring that to Monk Chat this evening. Anything from the audience? Yeah, go ahead.
Could you say a little bit more about the world being defined by the five senses?
Yeah, so what is the Buddha? For the most part, the Buddha talks about subjective experience. So very, very rarely does the Buddha talk about anything like what we would call objective reality. He almost always talks strictly in terms of subjective experience. So the Buddha says, what is the world? The world is sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought, because that is our subjective experience. So when we start talking about objective reality, then that just gets into a bunch of hypothesizing and theory crafting and papancha, just a bunch of like thought and proliferation. Because we have never once in our entire life experienced objective reality. So we're talking about something that we don't know, and something that we have never known, and something that until we attain full awakening, we never will know. So the Buddha is saying, what do you actually know? You know your own subjective experience. That's it. So what do you analyze in order to develop wisdom? Subjective experience. What do you work with in order to attain awakening? Subjective experience. Where does 100% of Buddhist practice happen? Subjective experience. So realistically, what is our world? Our world is subjective experience. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
Yes, Bhante. I'm just a little curious if you could sort of characterize or speak about something. Yeah, you specifically said that the Buddha isn't saying he's omnipotent in terms of like bending, natural reality laws. My question is a little bit about more omniscience versus omnipotent, and specifically, the first definition was completely understood, and I don't think that necessarily implies omniscience. And lastly, just the other reason why I've occasionally reflected on this is the whole Sahampatampati, pointed out for him to teach. Anyway, that's part of the reason for my question also, about omniscience or non.
Yeah, so the question of the omniscience of a Buddha, this is one of those long-standing debates in Buddhism. Is the Buddha fully omniscient? Is he partially omniscient? Does he have constant omniscience or specific omniscience? Like these are some of these long-standing debates in Buddhism. And I honestly doubt we're going to resolve these debates anytime soon. So, I mean, I can start going to talking about the different sides and how they justify their standpoints, but I'm not really sure how good that's the way to spend our time. And what was the other part of? Oh, Brahma Sampati. Yeah, so that's one of those doubtful things in the suttas where one running theory is that little vignette was added in later in order to, as a way of converting Brahmanists. It's like, even your Brahma god came to ask the Buddha to teach. It's kind of a way of like, hey, even your deity likes the Buddha. So was there actually a Brahma named Sahampati who came and invited the Buddha to teach right after his awakening? It's possible. Is that a necessary component of the life of a Buddha? I don't think so. I'm personally of the opinion that the Buddha would have started teaching either way, because that's the nature of a Buddha. The nature of a Buddha is to teach other people how to attain awakening. So it would have actually made zero sense for him to not teach. So did the Brahma Sahampati invite the Buddha to teach? Maybe, maybe not. I actually don't see it as making any difference either way. Yeah, I wouldn't get into that personally.
Thank you, Bhante. That's just part of the reason for my question, and relative to the other, I didn't know I was stepping into something that was just not known. So the answer is there is not a firm answer. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Why were the senses listed later on in the sutta with the first two specifically, and then the others as a group?
So we see this in a handful of suttas. So normally we talk the six senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought. But in a few suttas, smell, taste, and touch are condensed into a single sense. Why is it done that way? I don't know. But it's in a few suttas, the Buddha has this simpler set where there's 4 senses instead of 6, where he combines smell, taste, and touch. And actually combining smell and taste is actually quite sensible, since I think according to current biological understanding, they say that these two senses overlap 90%, that 90% of your sense of taste is your sense of smell and vice versa. Why did the Buddha also include skin contact with that one? Again, I'm not really sure. But one thing that comes to mind is that sight and sound are about perceiving things which are clearly external to the body, Whereas smell, taste, and touch are all very much directly connected to the body. So very tactile. So that's one possible reason why he might have used the word. So the word here is mutta, by the way. Not that it means anything if one doesn't know Pali. Honestly, I think just sometimes the Buddha wanted to use a simpler description of the senses rather than going into the full six. Because then it's kind of beside the point. So here the Buddha is not, the point of the Buddha is not to go into a full description of the senses. He's just saying like whatever there is in the world, a Tathāgata has understood it. So it might be why he used the shorter, simpler description of the senses. Yeah, I wouldn't think too much about it. It's just an alternate description of sense contact that we see in a few suttas. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
You since had a question. I'm curious about that. The meaning, which could be rendered as the consistent one, which doesn't sound very exciting in English. The consistent, but it occurred to me that actually is this topic that I'm interested in from the point of view of things like honesty and sincerity, which seem to me to be important to the Buddhist path, and an important quality of the Buddha. They say, as I understand it, according to the tradition, they say that he never told a lie, even in all of his past lives as a bodhisattva. And so I was wondering if we could find a meaning that would be more kind of or a translation that would be more inspiring, that captures this meaning of kind of sincerity and honesty. And also I had a question of, did I actually understand the meaning right? Is it that he does as he teaches, or is it that he keeps his promises, like in the meaning we have in Vinaya?
I should have warned you ahead of time. If you ask multiple questions, I will forget the first one by the time you say the second one. So actually, possibly just translating Tathāgata as the truthful one, because that actually captures what he's pointing to with all of these. All of these have to do with truth to one degree or another. So the truthful one, that might be the most complete. Sometimes I translate Tathāgata as truth finder, but then that misses out on the truth speaker and so on. So maybe just the truthful one. And what was your other question?
Well, I was actually, so the second one actually may have been better to ask first, because it was about what is the actual meaning of the description? Is it that he does what he says he will do, kind of thing? That he keeps his promises, or is it that he does the same as he teaches?
I think he does the same as he teaches. So again, he tells people not to kill, and he also doesn't kill. He tells people not to steal, and he also doesn't steal, and so on. And on that subject of the senses, so Kumu says, smell, taste, and touch, molecules have to touch the receptors, whereas sound and light are via waves. So Kumu here is making a distinction in terms of how sight and sound operate as being distinctly different from how smell, taste, and touch operate. But I see you're not very convinced by this. Okay. Again, I wouldn't worry about it. It's just a simpler way of talking about sensory experience. And it looks like the last question from online. So anything else before we conclude for the morning? Okay, so we'll go ahead and end the session with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you this evening.